When it comes to F1, we all know that money talks. Drivers earn millions of dollars to compete in the most prestigious motorsport in the world, and this can make them a little hard to control. So how does the FIA keep the drivers in line? The main way is by fining them, and we're not talking about the kind of money for parking tickets here, but big money. So what are some of the craziest reasons F1 drivers have been fined for? Stay tuned to find out. First up, assaulting a marshal. These days, it's pretty rare that a motorsport ends in hand-to-hand violence, but back in the old days, it was much more common. And it wasn't only between drivers. Sometimes innocent bystanders were caught up in fights too. In 1977, a year after James Hunt won his only world championship, he was fined $2,000 for assaulting a marshal. After Hunt crashed at the Canadian Grand Prix, a number of marshals were trying to help him get out of the car safely and off the track. This is standard procedure and is to make sure that the driver is not injured. During the race, Hunt was battling with Mario Andretti for the win and had already lost the season to Niki Lauda. On the 58th lap, the two were coming up to lap Hunt's McLaren teammate Jochen Mass when Hunt collided with him. Hunt was so angry that he took his frustration out on anyone who was unlucky enough to be around him. When a volunteer marshal grabbed him to stop him from walking back onto the track, Hunt punched him square in the face. The punch knocked the marshal to the ground and even made him bleed. On top of the $2,000 fine by the FIA, the marshal who was punched was also successful in suing Hunt. He was also charged $750 for making his way to the pit lane in an unsafe manner. Next, team orders. In a time before team orders were allowed to be given over the radio, Ferrari were involved in a controversy that cost them $100,000. It was the 2010 German Grand Prix, and their two drivers, Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa, were battling it out for first place. Alonso was trailing Massa, but hot on his tail. However, it still seemed a little difficult ask for Alonso to overtake Massa in equal machinery. That was until lap 48, when Massa's race engineer radioed through to his driver with a now infamous message. Okay, so Fernando is faster than you. Can you confirm you understood that message? Of course, Massa understood the message and let Alonso pass with ease. Ferrari were then given a $100,000 fine for the team order violation. By the end of the year, though, the FIA decided to get rid of the ban on team orders. That was because teams could easily send cryptic messages to communicate with their drivers, so it was too hard to enforce the rules anyway. Next, we have Verstappen's fisticuffs. You know the feeling of being cut off by another driver? It's infuriating. Where are they looking? What are they doing? Don't they know how dangerous it is? This has led to countless road rage incidents between drivers. Well, it happens to F1 drivers too. After a dramatic 2018 Brazilian Grand Prix, where a collision with Ocon cost him a victory, Max Verstappen was penalized for an aggressive altercation after the race. Verstappen had been leading the race comfortably before attempting to overtake and lap Esteban Ocon. The two then collided and Verstappen lost the lead. Ocon received a 10-second stop-and-go penalty for causing a collision, but that did nothing to cool the temper of Max. Channeling his inner James Hunt, Verstappen confronted Ocon in the post-race weighing room. He pushed him several times while yelling at him, which landed him in hot water the following day. The FIA punished Verstappen with 2 days of public service, which involved observing and helping out stewards in a Formula E race and participating in an FIA International Stewards Program event. Verstappen said that it was a good lesson for him and that he had learned a lot about the job that stewards have to do. He would also have been happy that he was public service rather than a fine, unlike the next fine given out to him in 2021. Don't go anywhere because coming up is a fine that decided an entire world championship. Also, find out how standing in the wrong place cost two drivers $1 million. Up next, $100,000 and a championship. Probably the most impactful event on our list is a collision between F1 legends Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna in 1989 that determined the world champion. Just like in 2021 with Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix was decided by the F1's governing body of the time, FISA. In the race, Senna was following closely behind Prost for much of the race until they crashed on lap 40 when neither of them was willing to give up a corner. Both cars were brought to a standstill. Prost left his car and Senna waved for the marshals to help push start his car. It worked and Senna rejoined the race and passed the race leader to win the race. It seemed that Senna had just won the world championship, but the drama came after the race when Senna was disqualified for cutting the chicane following the collision with Prost. As a result, Prost was declared the 1989 F1 world champion. Senna's team McLaren then appealed the decision, but not only was the appeal rejected, Senna was fined $100,000 and suspended for 6 months. This was one of the most controversial races in F1 history, and to this day fans debate whether or not the crash was intentional. Next, no touching. Have you ever been told to move away from someone's expensive car? Car owners can be very precious about people touching their pride and joy, and the same goes in Formula One. F1 cars are finely crafted machines. Millimeters and milligrams add up, and so touching someone else's car is a big deal. Max Verstappen found this out the hard way when he was fined a massive £50,000 for touching Lewis Hamilton's car at the 2021 Brazilian Grand Prix after qualifying. It seemed harmless enough, a gentle touch of the Mercedes rear wing to have a look how it compared to his Red Bull. But the stewards were not impressed and enforced a regulation that states that no one except the driver may touch a stopped car unless it is in the paddock, the competitor's designated garage area, the pit lane, or on the starting grid. The rule is in place to avoid any tampering with competitor cars, but it was the first time such a big fine was given. Verstappen later laughed about the fine, saying that he hopes they have a nice dinner and a lot of wine with the money. For most of us, this might be a few years of rent, but maybe where Max lives, in Monaco, this is the price of a dinner. Now we have seatbelt safety. F1 is all about speed, competition, and excitement, but it's also about safety. And what's the number one safety rule we learn about before driving a car? To put your seatbelt on. Failing to remember this golden rule cost Lewis Hamilton a €5,000 fine in 2021. After winning the race from his starting position way back in 10th place, Hamilton wanted to celebrate in style, and so he borrowed a Brazilian flag from a marshal to pay tribute to his childhood hero, Ayrton Senna, and the Brazilian crowd. The flag sat in his cockpit with him on the cooldown lap, but Hamilton undid his seatbelt to put it there. That was a big no-no for the stewards, who fined him €5,000 for the safety violation and the example it set for junior categories. So next time you think about undoing your seatbelt while driving, remember that even the best drivers in the world aren't allowed to. Lastly, know your place. This one just goes to show how much F1 cares about procedures. The podium celebration is part of a ritual, and there are many rules outlining exactly what needs to be done. At the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello were ordered to pay a whopping $1 million for ignoring these rules. Schumacher insisted that Barrichello stand on the first place step rather than the second place because of how the race result was decided. During the race, Barrichello was ordered by Ferrari to allow his teammate Michael Schumacher to overtake him for first place. This was to maintain Schumacher's first place in the Drivers' World Championship. Unlike Ferrari's team orders in 2010, these were technically allowed at the time, but this didn't help the crowd, who were clearly disappointed and booed the two drivers after the race. Schumacher clearly felt guilty and allowed Barrichello to stand in the first position on the podium. This violated the rules of the podium celebration, and so the FIA fined Ferrari, Barrichello, and Schumacher $1 million, which they split evenly between them. All these fines make us happy not to be an F1 driver. Do you think you could handle costing your team or yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars? And which one do you think was the most insane? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting F1 content.